Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you to Robbie for returning to redo our program. We had some technical difficulties last time, but I'm sure everything will go very smoothly. Let you all know that this program is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube website, the library website, as well as Master Gardeners, as have all our previous Zoom programs. I'll also, if you have any questions or thoughts during the presentation, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat box or send me through the Q&A. I'll be keeping track of those for Robbie after she finishes her presentation. In the meantime, let's get going. Welcome, Robbie.
Thank you. It's good to be back. So, well, I think we'll just start in a little bit before where we left off the last time. The program for this morning is Houseplants for the Eager, the Willing, and the Intrigued. This is a program from the Fresno County Master Gardeners. And in a word of introduction, I have been a Master Gardener for 28 years, since class of 1993. I have 2 adult children who are both avid gardeners, a husband who's an avid gardener, and 2 dogs who are garden superintendents without being diggers. My special areas of interest are herbs and herb garden design, history of gardening, wreath construction, poisonous plants, and houseplants. So be careful which presentation you get from me. It could be poisonous plants, it could be houseplants, but this one is houseplants. So how do we start out with an interest in houseplants? For a lot of us, it's quite innocent. Somebody gives us a plant or gives us a cutting, like this ginseng fig. Somebody gave me this fig some years ago. I thought, that's the weirdest looking thing I've seen. It looks like something out of Harry Potter, but it flourished and did well. So that was plant 1 many years ago. Then somebody gives you a second plant, and it seems like it's a good companion to the first one. So then you have 2. Then somebody moves away and gives you their plant collection, and you have 3, 4, and 5. And they're all healthy and they're lovely, and you're panicking a little bit, wondering how to take care of them, but there they are. And then before you know it, there's a lot more than 5, because people now think you have a reputation for plants and they give you plants, or you start going to nurseries and buy plants. And finally, your house starts to look like this. And I will tell you, this looks very much like my daughter's houses. It's like everywhere you turn, there are plants in all the windows, on all the tables, and they're constantly bringing new things home. So with that as an introduction of how you might get there, the question, of course, is why houseplants? Why something in the house rather than outside? Or why something that's alive rather than something that's plastic? So looking at this really quite intriguing picture gives you an idea. They add personality and softness. There's just such a tremendous variety of colors and shapes. Just the presence of plants is kind of calming and meditative. They do refresh the air. And for a lot of us, there's gardening inside when there's no outside in-ground planting available. They're also, as many of my plants are, memory keepers. When someone gave me a rooted cutting or a gift plant, they're a source of well-earned pride when they are growing well. So the question that a lot of people ask is, well, do you really need green fingers or green thumbs to be an indoor plant gardener? No, you absolutely don't, but it helps to know some of the basics. This illustration is from a medieval manuscript, and it's a story of how ginseng plants originally were harvested. It was originally thought, mandrake plants. It was originally thought that mandrakes screamed when they came out of the ground, and that the scream would drive human beings crazy. So the harvesting technique was to put a long rope around the plant, tie it to a dog's neck, walk away, and then call the dog. And the dog ran towards its owner, yanked the plant out of the ground, but the owner was out of earshot. So you don't need to be that elaborate of a gardener or a knowing garden lore, but it does help to know the basics. Some of you may recognize this plant on the right. It's Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors. It's a plant that theoretically came from outer space as a seedling, started out tiny and cute, just like the plant in the picture, and grew up to be a much more complicated plant. So, of course, the basics include things like a reputable source. You do not want to plant from outer space. You want to know what its light needs, its water needs are, temperature, humidity and ventilation, fertilization, soluble salts, which is part of the potting soil, containers, repotting, and my favorite, grooming. So, light. By the way, I've made a few notes on these slides so that you don't have to copy everything down. You can just look it up quickly afterward. Plants, light needs vary a lot. The plant you select for an indoor plant needs to take into consideration what your light and your air needs are available in the house. The light will shift during the seasons, and you may need to move your house plants around. But general rule of thumb is that you want plants that are tolerant of bright, filtered, indirect light rather than plants that you hope might live in bright, bright sun. Bright sun in Fresno fries so many of our plants. Water. It's a true thing that more plants die from overwatering than underwatering. The watering that you do should leach out soluble salts and drain out the hole in the bottom of the pot. So you want them to drain frequently enough, but not become or remain soggy. Water when the soil is dry, 1 inch to 2 inches down, and don't let standing water in the pot saucers unless the pot is elevated on pebbles and is not actually resting in the water. I usually suggest to friends that they consider what I jokingly call a hydrometer plant, something like a peace lily. It's a plant that is one of the more water sensitive plants, but is also very tough and hardy, and it will give you a visual reminder that your plants are thirsty. If the leaves on a peace lily are starting to droop, probably time to water everything. In addition to that, it's a handsome, handsome plant with pretty white blossoms on it. Temperature. Well, the textbook says temperature is 70 to 80 degrees during the day, 10 to 15 degrees lower at night. This may cause us to laugh hysterically in the San Joaquin Valley. Basically, what we're trying to do is to keep them at a moderate temperature during the day and hopefully someplace where the temperature can drop a little at night. The other thing that's sometimes a problem in the winter, but not really, is not putting plants on top of heat sources, like right over a baseboard heater or on top of a hot air vent or a TV, and also not putting them in cold drafts like an air conditioning unit or in the winter open windows or doors. You want them kind of like you'd want to be sitting in your own comfortable chair reading a book in the evening. You don't want to be too hot, you don't want to be too cold, and you don't want to draft. Humidity and ventilation. One school of thought is that misting plants doesn't do much to increase humidity, but it does keep the leaves dust free. I tend to mist my plants just because I have most of my plants clustered, and I use the technique that's demonstrated here, that they're in trays of pebbles with the water coming up to the base of the pot, but not actually soaking the bottom of the pot. The other important thing with humidity is to keep plants out of drafts if you can, particularly in the winter when they go from warm to a chilly draft. Humidity in Fresno is tricky, but mist or spray away, or take your pots, put them in the kitchen sink or the bathtub, give them a good spray, let them drain. This misting does a good job of helping keeping dust away and dust mites away. Fertilization, probably the second most serious mistake that house plant gardeners make after watering too much is too much fertilizer. Fertilizing every 4 to 6 weeks at the most. You want a fertilizer that's about 30, 20, 20. That's, let me see, work out the percentages here very quickly. That's nitrogen 30%, phosphorus 20%, potassium 20%. There's a huge variety of commercial fertilizers available. You can get them in the form of sticks that you stick into the soil or things that you water in. Again, under fertilized rather than over fertilized, particularly if you started with good soil, which of course you have. Potting soil. Soil for pots and containers is not dirt out of your garden. You don't want to just go out, dig up something in the back and stick it in. That's a virtual death sentence for your plants. You want something that's got good water retention, that will keep air trapped via bark or peat or wood chips or compost or sand, vermiculite, and perlite for drainage. Most good quality potting soils in bags will have a combination of all these ingredients, and it's absolutely worth it to buy good quality soil to work on the plants that you really want to have flourish. Pots and containers are probably the next most enjoyable thing in indoor gardening after the plant themselves. Who could say, I mean, I love the plants, I love all the containers. The main thing that is important in pots and other containers is drainage. Drainage, 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 drainage. They have to be able to get water out the bottom as well as in the top. You want to use a pot that is large enough to keep the roots cool. If you're in an area where the indirect light is heating up the plants a fair amount, you might want to cluster several pots together so that they're giving each other a little protection. There's a lovely kind of pot called a catch pot. It is a pot that does not have a bottage drainage hole. They are lovely to have your house plants in, but only as an outer pot. Your inner pot needs to have drainage, and you need to be able to slip the inner pot out, water it, let it drain, and then put it back in. In this picture, the bottom photographs here are catch pots. Quite lovely, but in each case, there's an inner pot that will allow you to lift things out. So if you've got a really porous container, you want to also line it with plastic or some sort of a water retentive paint to help it retain moisture. So pros and cons on pots. Plastic is lightweight, it's inexpensive, it's moisture retaining, and it's sometimes very strong, and it's often very ugly. It's a good material overall for pots, but it's one that you might want to consider using with catch pots unless it happens to be a particularly attractive plastic, if that's not an oxymoron. Glazed ceramic is heavy. It's often very handsome. It does a very good job of retaining moisture for the inner pot, but it does break when it drops and it chips. So you need to be willing to make an investment in that and be willing to say goodbye to it when you've dropped it, hopefully not on your toe, and you've chipped it or broken it. Terracotta, the classic orangey brown clay pots, are moderately priced. They're simple. They do a fair amount of evaporation through the walls. They are just your classic plant material, and with a saucer under them, they do well as an indoor houseplant pot. With both ceramic and terracotta, they are vulnerable to chipping, and they are definitely vulnerable to frost damage. So if you have them outside, you want to keep them sheltered from frost. Repotting and grooming. This is where I really enjoy having houseplants. I make a real mess out of my kitchen a couple of times a year because I repot when I've got roots that are sticking out the holes in the bottom, or if I tap the plant out of the pot, the whole thing is pot bound. The roots are winding around the inside the pot. If the plant has stopped growing, or if it's just generally looking like it's ready to pick itself up out of the pot and run across the county, you definitely want to look at repotting. You want to increase your pot size by one size rather than a whole lot larger if you're keeping the plant intact. If you're keeping the single plant, make it a pot that's about an inch larger. However, you might have a plant that could be taken apart, like the photograph here. And that's what you want to be able to look at for taking apart and planting several in smaller pots. Okay, presuming you have healthy plants, you're a happy camper, life is good, but not all houseplants are healthy all of the times. One of the things I really urge friends, if they're buying a new plant, is to isolate it for a couple of weeks after you bring it. There's always a chance that it's bringing in a pest that may not even be visible to the naked eye. So you want to make sure you're not bringing in something that would contaminate your other plants. I will tell you absolutely there's no such thing as spontaneous generation. If you have a plant that suddenly is developing pests, it's gotten it from somewhere. Something has walked or ridden across to get to the plants. So sometimes they're large and four-legged, like the dog who nibbles, possibly with serious content, or the cat who poops in a freshly repotted plant. Those are frustrating, they're irritating, but they're not the end of the world because you can usually mechanically protect against a pet attacking your plant. What's more of a concern is the insects that are sometimes almost completely invisible. Spider mites, whitefly, scale, different kinds of things that are tiny and will suddenly make your whole plant just look like it's tired, and then like it's sick, and then like it's dead. So if you're not sure what the nature of your sick plant is, please do call the Master Gardener hotline or check with any friend or acquaintance who's a Master Gardener and get a good diagnosis on what it is. There's a variety of treatments that you can give plants that have pests, ranging from soap and water or safer soap and water to systemic pesticides. But get a good diagnosis on what you've got first and ask as soon as you see something. Don't wait until the plant is looking really sick. So the most important thing to consider having to do with bringing in new plants is consider what your sources are. If you are taking a cutting from someone's garden or a plant in someone's yard or their plant in their house, it's particularly important to isolate the plant for at least a couple of weeks until you're sure that it's pest-free. If you're buying it, buy commercially from a good source. There's a lot of retail sources. I've had excellent luck buying strange and wonderful things on the internet. And it's usually possible to get healthy, vigorous plants at a comparatively moderate price. When you get anything, look for pests, look for pot bondage, look particularly carefully, as I said, of something that you're getting that is a cutting from a friend. The cuttings that you get and the plants that you grow are a source of enormous pleasure, and they're as much fun as quilts when it comes to remembering, oh, I got this from so-and-so, oh, I got this from so-and-so. My favorite plant that I had for years was a great-great-great-great-grand cutting from a begonia that my aunt's mother had been given for a wedding present in 1915. It broke my heart when the last cutting on it died because that was a plant that had just been a magical family plant. So look for your sources, pick healthy, happy plants, get your good soil and good pots, be prepared for water, be prepared for good light, and for heaven's sakes, don't buy anything really strange where they say it's only $1.95. Thank you.
Okay, wow, what a great presentation. You know what? Can you give some examples? And please, anyone, we are taking any questions if you have any. I have any recommendations on plants that to purchase, especially for someone like me. I'm not a greedy thumb. The poor little things tend to shudder when I just walk into the nursery. So something, especially for those of us, or you're just away from your house a lot, you know, so those not can be as attentive, but good plants to start with and work on.
Well, the first thing I will tell you is that there's no such thing as purple thumbs. You know, everybody's got some capacity to grow something. It's just a matter of what you pick and what you want to select. For things that do well with low maintenance and do well with moderate, very moderate light and moderate water, I like anything in the pothos family, P-O-T-H-O-S. They're sometimes called devil's ivies. They're just vigorous and they grow as a vine. You can drape them around things, over, under things. And as long as you keep a reasonable moisture to the soil and a reasonable amount of light, mine grew for years in an office that had no outside windows, but they liked the artificial light. So that's one that I would suggest just as a starter. I won't say you can't kill it, but I'd say it's pretty darn purple thumb friendly.
That's what I like to hear. I have a couple questions for you. Someone has stated their money tree looks like it's dying. The branches are dry and leaves are shriveling up. What to do?
Money tree, it is probably dying. They are a bit tricky to keep alive. They need decent humidity. I don't know what the gardener's water frequency is, but they both overwater and underwater fairly easily. The best thing I could suggest, and this is kind of triage, is cut off things that are dying or look like they're almost dead. Give it a good flushing with water, like let the water run out the bottom. See if that makes any difference in a couple of weeks. And if it doesn't, then the last ditch effort would be find some good potting soil and try repotting it. But they're a little bit tricky to keep alive. They do well in bright indirect light. So there's, without seeing the plant itself and without seeing where it is, it's kind of hard to diagnose super quickly, but those are triage things I would suggest.
Would this be a good one for them to send in, pop an email to a picture and send it to the master gardeners?
The lovely thing with the helpline is that you can take a photograph, you can send it in, and without having to bring a specimen in, folks in the helpline can look at it and give you a much better idea of what it might be.
Great. I have a couple more questions in here. If I want plants in a low light area, do I need a grow light? How long does it need to be on?
It depends on how low your low light is. I think it's generally easier to pick plants that are tolerant of low light than to try to pick a higher plant need or higher light need plant and grow it in a dim area. House plants, just as a really rough rule of thumb, you want 7 to 8 hours of good clear light a day. So if you're in an area that you've just got really, really low light and there's no chance of moving the plant to an area in the house that's got brighter light, I would say invest in a good quality grow lamp, and you're probably looking at 8 hours a day, plus or minus. It'll depend a little bit on what the plant itself is. I try to not make a sweeping generalization on, if you do this, this will solve the problem. But if you have the plants already, you can do a little research on what their light needs are. If you don't have them yet, hit a good local nursery with a good source of houseplants and talk with somebody on the staff on what does well in low light.
Wonderful.
It kind of depends on whether you're trying to rescue an orphan or not.
We've had a couple people ask, and maybe Roz Tampone, who's also here from the Master Gardeners, could type into the chat box the phone or webmail email address where people can send their questions. So maybe you could do that for us, Roz. And in the
as soon as Robbie's finished answering questions, I'll have a little review of upcoming classes and those email addresses.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's see. Can you recommend a good fertilizer?
The best fertilizer, a good balance of mixture in fertilizer. The three main ingredients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So ideally, you'd want a good balance. You'd want something like nitrogen, which has the letter N standing for it, 30, phosphorus with a P, 20, and potassium with a K, 20. So if you're looking at a plant or at a label in a plant store, it'll say NPK and then it'll have numbers after it. You want N30, P20, K20, plus or minus a little bit.
Oh, that's really helpful.
That's if you're purchasing something commercial. You can also use composted horse manure and all sorts of other good things like that, but those are more do it yourself.
Right. What is the best way to keep and grow a spider plant? Someone said I had one in the past and it turned brown. I think I likely overwatered and I didn't get any direct natural light inside.
They need bright indirect light. They can also be outdoors in the shade for a good part of the year in our climate. So if you've got a shaded patio that you could hang the plant or put it on a plant stand, they're happy campers outdoors for spring, summer, and fall. They tend to be sensitive to overwatering, but water when the soil is mostly dry. I think your issue is probably more light than water. I have a great big bushy one that I grew from a little tiny cutting, and it's got good light, but I'm stingy with the water.
In general, we've gone on a lot about overwatering outside, especially succulents with rods. And I know houseplants can vary quite a bit, but is there a kind of rule of thumb on watering so that we don't overwater?
Stick your finger down the side of the pot, and if it's dry a couple of inches down, it's probably time to water.
But if it's moist, then refrain.
Yeah, it's right. The overwatering is a two-part problem. Sometimes it's watering too frequently, and sometimes it's watering in a way that you don't have the right soil or the right drainage. And the plant winds up with soil that is too moist for too long.
Gotcha.
So you want to make sure you've got the good soil and the good drainage, and then checking the soil. You can also go to a good plant store and buy a hydrometer. There's something that you can buy that you stick in, looks like a giant turkey baster that you stick in the soil, and it'll give you a percentage of moisture. So you can do that also if you're really high church about something, you can do that. But you can also just use your finger and run your finger on the side of it, inside the pot.
Great. This is a question for me, and it may sound like an odd one, but knowing basically how most houses are built window-wise, are there better rooms in the house that plants seem to do better in, or worse? I know it sounds strange, but for that direct, indirect light is what I'm thinking.
The light's the main factor, and that depends entirely on which direction your house is facing. It also depends on the season, that a plant or a window that may get really, really intense sun in high summer and fall may be much softer light in the winter and early spring. If your bathroom has good light, plants generally like bathrooms because of all the humidity. Not to mention you can pop your plant in the bathtub and give it a quick shower. But I generally try to keep my plants away from my stove, both because of heat and because of oil molecules in the air. I don't want the plants to get a layer of gook that would normally be going up through the fan. So yeah, I've got a lot of my houseplants in my kitchen because it happens to have really good light. But it's good light for most of the year. But generally, the other rooms of the house, particularly rooms where you can get a little humidity in there, are a better bet. And that, as I said earlier, that's something that you'll have to kind of look at through the year, is that you may find that you move plants around. Like your house having winter and summer furniture arrangements, you may have winter and summer plant arrangements, depending on what kind of light you've got and how big your plant is. My mother had a weeping fig for years that she moved. She had 3 different locations in the living room and dining room that she moved it seasonally. Like when she cleaned the carpets, she moved the plant. And it was big enough to hang a macaque monkey in it. It was so large and so vigorous and healthy. But it was all north facing light, but she just moved it around to near different windows.
Yeah, I know I've had the experience in the past. You have a plant doing beautifully, so much so that you want to show it off and you move it to another room and it immediately dies.
And it says, don't like it here, and either dies back or dies. The other thing, by the way, that happens sometimes is when you buy a foliage plant in a store and bring it home, you'll get some leaf drop on it. That's not necessarily a permanent problem. It means the plants were grown in a greenhouse with optimum lighting. They were designed for show. They were designed for sale. You get them home, you have slightly less optimum lighting, sun, moisture, and the plant will essentially kind of go into shock and drop some leaves. Don't worry about it and don't immediately rush it back to the store. Give it some time, and usually new leaves will sprout out and it will fill back in.
Wonderful.
So
Thank
most reputable nurseries will deal with a plant where there's something that is obviously wrong with the plant. Trader Joe's, I can't speak highly enough of. If you bring anything back, sometimes things that it's your fault, and they just look at it and say, oops, and give you credit on it.
This question may go to either you or Roz, referring to indoor. This may be a really broad question, but are most indoor succulents created equal when it comes to care? This person's a plant novice and trying to get a little advice here.
You know, I read that question, and what I would recommend is during the summertime, your succulents may need a little bit more water, but in the fall, winter, and early spring, I probably only water my succulents indoors maybe once, maybe twice a month. And just like Robbie said, you stick your finger in. If it's dry, you water it. If it's moist, do not water it, because remember that overwatering is the death of most succulents. You know, if your plants are outside, when it's 100 plus, I water probably twice a week. When it's in the 90s, I can probably get away with once a week. And then towards the spring, fall, maybe once every 2 weeks. They don't need to be watered quite as much, but it really it depends on the temperature. I did have a couple of other things to answers to some of the questions that Robbie had regarding spider mites. They're really hard to find. Sometimes you'll see the webbing on your plants, but an easy way to determine if you have spider mites, and this is what a lot of people who grow bonsai do, they put a sheet of white paper under a leaf. They tap the leaf. If there are dots that are moving on your white paper, most likely they're spider mites. And then you treat for spider mites. And regarding some easy plants to grow indoors, the creeping Charlie, we used to have those like years, maybe back in the 70s when I first moved here from New York. Those were some of the easiest things to grow. Variegated Scindopsis, which are those pothos plants, extremely easy to grow. We had one in our bathroom that had a light coming down from the roof, and it died last year. So I went out and replaced it. I put it back in there. It barely grew. I stuck it outside for the summertime, and it's probably grown 3 feet. So, you know, things that can be indoors during the winter, you really can probably put them outdoors in the summer and springtime and early fall. And another plant that's easy to grow indoors are most of the ficus, the fig plants, the ones with the big, they call them rubber trees, extremely easy to propagate as well as easy to grow. And what I do is I grow them indoors for the fall, winter, early spring, put them outdoors in the early spring to early fall, and they must put on probably 300% more leaves. So those are some things that I would recommend. And Robbie, I don't know if you have any other questions or any other comments that you want to make, but I want to thank you for redoing the houseplants presentation. I know I learned a lot, and I'm hoping everybody else who joined us today did too. And if you're through, I can share a couple of, I can share my screen and go over a few upcoming classes and stuff that we have.
Good to go.
So I'm hoping everybody sees this. Let me get the slideshow going on that. So these are our upcoming classes from September to December. There are two that are going to be held at the Woodward Park Library on September 25th at 10 a.m. Ann Edal will do an in-person class on composting. So if you're interested in taking some of your table scraps and other cuttings of leaves and things, she'll show you how you can make that into your own compost. And then on Sunday, October 10th at 2 o'clock, I'll be doing a succulent pumpkin demonstration. And again, those classes are in person at the Woodward Park Library. And then we have our lineup of our Master Gardener fall classes. All the ones in blue will be done at the Garden of the Sun. It's located on Winery, close to McKinley, right next door to the Discovery Center. And so we have irrigation, we have spring bulbs, olive curing, topiaries, propagation, wreaths and swags, and tool maintenance. And the wreaths and swags, you'll see that it has a $sign next to it. It's a $30 class. That's what the cost will be. Robbie, I can let you talk a little bit about that too, if you'd like. But the signups will not be until November. And then these are some of the addresses that you had asked about. The top one takes you to the Fresno County Master Gardener website. The second one is to the helpline. If you have any gardening questions or photos or any concerns about your plants, trees, or shrubs or lawn, you can email those questions to the helpline and they'll get back to you, usually within the same day that you ask the question. And then if you're interested in some of our classes, you can go to this website and it will get you on our mailing list. So I'm going to stop this. No, I have one more slide to show you. I'm not sure if people are really interested in our Zooming with the Master Gardener series that we've had with the Fresno County Libraries. In my opinion, they've been very, very successful. And if there are other topics that you would like us to offer, please email your ideas. And if you can put attention Roz on that, those emails will be sent to me and I'll see if we can offer a Zoom presentation by one of our qualified Master Gardeners. And so I'm going to stop the share on this and I want to take you to our Master Gardener website. Oh, and I don't see it here, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to, let me see if this one will take us there. I thought I had it open when we began.
Well, it looks like Robbie isn't the only one to have a little technical difficulty now.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry, I can't. I wanted to show you how to get on to the website. But once you get on to the Fresno County Master Gardener website, on the left-hand side, there'll be a menu. If you go to community classes and click on that, it'll take you to the offerings that we have. And then it says to register for the class, click down below. Make sure you hit the arrow key because that will take you to the location so you can sign up for the class. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us today and thank Laura and the Woodward Park Library for offering these Zoom classes, and hope that you enjoyed it a lot and hope that you learned a lot from herbs to Drought 2021, the succulents, the house plants, just all the classes that we've offered from April until now. So Laura, thank you again.
And thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure and something really positive in a time that's been a little trying for everybody. I'd also, again, Robbie, thank you so much for rescheduling your program. It has been an absolute delight having you here today. And I look forward to seeing everyone in the future. So everyone take care and we'll be back.
Thank you again, Laura. Thank you, Robbie.
Thank you.